Ethan was no ordinary teenager. Most people who saw him on a daily basis at school would describe him as quiet and unassuming, someone who always kept to himself. He wasn't the type to seek attention, and his disinterest in sports or flashy hobbies made him an easy target for ridicule. But if anyone had known what lay beneath the surface of his introverted personality, they would have never dared to provoke him. Ethan had been trained to fight, not just for self-defense, but as a way of life. His father, a former military man with a storied past, had raised him with a strict regimen of martial arts from a young age. It wasn't just about physical strength or speed, it was about discipline, control, and knowing when to act. And Ethan had absorbed every lesson his father had imparted, though he rarely spoke about it to anyone. It was a warm summer afternoon when the bikers first rolled into town. They were an imposing sight, their leather jackets adorned with patches and their roaring motorcycles shaking the streets as they cruised through the small town. The group was led by Razor, a hulking man with a gruff voice and a reputation that preceded him. Razor and his gang had been a thorn in the side of the town for months, picking on local teens, stealing their bikes, and generally terrorizing anyone who looked like they wouldn't put up a fight. Ethan, who had just finished a long day of studying for finals, decided to head to the park for a quick ride. The park was his sanctuary, a place where he could clear his head and practice some of the movements his father had taught him. It was quiet, peaceful, and he found comfort in the solitude. But as he neared the park entrance, he saw them, the bikers, congregating in the parking lot, laughing and causing a scene. Razor stood at the center of the group, his leather vest stretched tightly over his chest, a smug grin plastered on his face. Ethan slowed his bike, instinctively recognizing the danger that was beginning to unfold. "Hey, kid," Razor called out, his voice carrying across the lot. "That's a nice bike you got there. Looks expensive." Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't in the mood for trouble. He just wanted to pass through and enjoy a few minutes of peace before heading home. But Razor wasn't having it. He strode over to Ethan, blocking his path. "What's wrong, kid? Don't have the guts to talk back? Come on, let's see what you got." Ethan's heart rate began to pick up. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the biker's eyes on him. Razor wasn't just making small talk. This was a challenge. "I don't want any trouble," Ethan said calmly, trying to sidestep Razor's imposing figure. But Razor wasn't having it. "What? You think you're too good to talk to me? I'm talking to you, little man. You think you can just ride through our turf without paying your respects?" Ethan's grip tightened on the handlebars. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. His father's lessons echoed in his mind. Stay calm. Control yourself. Never react unless you have no other choice. But Razor wasn't done yet. He shoved Ethan hard, sending him stumbling back. "What's wrong, kid? You scared?" Ethan's instincts kicked in. He didn't want to fight, but this was no longer about being intimidated. It was about survival. Razor had crossed a line. Without thinking, Ethan moved. He sidestepped Razor's second shove, ducking low and using his body to twist Razor's arm behind him in a precise jiu-jitsu lock. Razor grunted in surprise, the sudden pressure on his arm forcing him to the ground with a grunt. The bikers froze. Razor's gang had always been the ones to do the intimidating, but now they were the ones caught off guard. Razor, furious, scrambled to his feet. "You little punk," he roared, shaking off the pain in his arm. He lunged at Ethan, swinging a heavy fist aimed at his face. But Ethan had already anticipated the move. With the precision of years of training, he ducked under the punch, delivering a swift strike to Razor's ribcage with his elbow. Razor gasped, his breath knocked out of him as he staggered backward. The gang watched in stunned silence, their bravado evaporating. Razor, humiliated and winded, tried to regain his composure. "Get him, boys!" he yelled, his voice desperate. The bikers charged forward, but Ethan was ready. He had faced opponents much larger than himself in his training, and he knew exactly how to neutralize threats quickly and effectively. The first biker reached him, swinging a wild punch. Ethan ducked and swept his leg, sending the biker crashing to the ground. Another came at him, but Ethan used a swift elbow to block the punch and then twisted the biker's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground. The remaining bikers hesitated. They weren't used to this kind of resistance. Razor, still trying to recover, gave one last angry growl before charging at Ethan once more. But Ethan had had enough. As Razor approached, Ethan feigned a move to the left, then quickly shifted to the right. In one fluid motion, he tripped Razor and sent him crashing into a nearby bench, where he landed with a painful thud. The gang stood in stunned silence as Razor lay on the ground, gasping for air. Ethan stood tall, his chest heaving with the adrenaline, but his face remained calm, almost disinterested. He wasn't looking for a fight. But now that it was over, he made it clear that the town wasn't theirs to terrorize. "You should leave," Ethan said, his voice steady and calm. "If you don't want things to get worse, I suggest you leave now." For a moment, there was no movement. Then, slowly, Razor's gang began to back away, their faces filled with disbelief. Razor, still recovering, shot Ethan one last venomous glare, but he knew better than to challenge the teenager again. With a final muttered curse, Razor and his gang mounted their bikes and rode off, their engines roaring as they disappeared down the road. Ethan stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. He could feel the tension leaving his body, but there was a slight tremor in his hands. He hadn't fought like that in a long time. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to be forced into it. But sometimes, standing up for yourself was the only way to make sure you were heard. A few minutes passed before some local teens, who had been watching the whole scene from a distance, cautiously approached him. They looked at Ethan with a mix of awe and admiration. "Dude, that was incredible," one of them said, clearly impressed. "You totally took down Razor and his guys." Ethan shrugged, trying to downplay the situation. It wasn't a big deal. They were just bullies. But the truth was, Ethan knew that in that moment, he had earned something more than respect. He had earned the knowledge that sometimes standing up for what was right meant not backing down, even when the odds were against you. Later that evening, Ethan's father sat him down for a conversation. "I heard about what happened today," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. "You did the right thing by defending yourself, but remember, violence should always be the last resort." Ethan nodded. "I know, Dad. I didn't want to fight, but they wouldn't leave me alone." His father gave him a rare, approving smile. "You showed restraint and control. That's what I've been trying to teach you. Just remember, fighting is never about proving something to others. It's about protecting yourself and those who can't protect themselves." Ethan smiled back. "I get it, Dad. I won't forget." And from that day on, Ethan's reputation in the town changed. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the back of the classroom anymore. He was someone who had earned the respect of even the toughest bikers, simply by standing his ground. As for Razor and his gang, they never returned to the park. They had learned a hard lesson that day. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because you never know when they might be the ones to fight back.